Rooted in the ancient, clandestine Navajo legend, the Skinwalker is a figure steeped in mystery and fear, an entity that defies the natural order. Fear is evoked just by talking about it, since a Skinwalker is more than just a monster. They are cursed humans who have given their souls to evil forces, turning them into something far more terrifying than human. A Skinwalker is a Yinaldlushi, a person who moves on all fours, according to Navajo tradition. These evil witches can change into any animal they want, including coyotes, wolves, bears, and birds. But it's not just their capacity to change shape that makes them very dangerous. It's their intense kinship with evil energies and their voracious appetite for mayhem, ill will, and death. It is stated that Skinwalkers cover their body with the hide of the beast they have chosen, wearing the skins of the creatures they transform into. When they move, their deformed shapes dart in and out of the shadows at an abnormally fast pace that is too fast for the human eye to follow. When they take on an animal shape, their eyes, which can be either red or yellow, glow with an unsettling alien light that seems to stare directly into the souls of those who are unlucky enough to come into contact with them. However, the terror of the Skinwalkers extends beyond their metamorphosis. They can evoke terrible nightmares, manipulate people's thoughts, and afflict their victims with misery. And insanity are just a few of their sinister, otherworldly skills. They are capable of imitating sounds and crying out to loved ones in a lifelike manner, enticing victims into traps or pushing them over the edge into madness. Their strange, warped shapes follow their victims just beyond the reach of light, and their high-pitched, unsettling laughing reverberates through the night. The perversion of the Skinwalkers' origins, however, is the most terrible feature of them. Skinwalkers were originally human, frequently strong medicine men or women, who abandoned everything precious to follow the path of evil. An heinous deed, generally the murder of a close family, must be committed in order to become a Skinwalker, permanently condemning one's soul and linking one to evil powers. Here are some historically recorded encounters with these creatures, some horrible encounters with the Skinwalker. In 1994, Terry and Gwen Sherman were searching for a peaceful place to start a new chapter of their lives. They thought they found it in a remote corner of northeastern Utah, a sprawling 480-acre property that offered isolation, fresh air, and space for their cattle. The land was beautiful, surrounded by endless sky, rugged hills, and vast open fields. But the quiet that first drew them in soon became suffocating as strange events began to unfold. The first encounter happened just weeks after they moved in. It was a calm evening, the kind where the only sound was the breeze rustling through the grass and the soft lowing of cattle. Terry and Gwen were outside tending to their livestock when they noticed a large creature on the horizon. At first glance, it appeared to be a wolf, but its size was far larger than any wolf they had ever seen. It stood nearly shoulder-high with Terry and moved with an unnerving grace as it approached the cattle pen. Oddly, the creature wasn't aggressive. In fact, it seemed docile, watching the Shermans with intelligent, knowing eyes. They felt an uneasy calm around it. Terry even commented to Gwen that it seemed like the wolf had been there before, as if it were familiar with the land. But in an instant, that strange calm shattered when the wolf lunged at a nearby calf, clamping its jaws around the young animal's neck. Terry, acting quickly, grabbed his rifle and fired at the creature. The first shot hit, but the wolf barely flinched. He fired again and again, 3 more rounds, but it was as if the bullets passed right through it. The animal calmly released the calf, turning its glowing eyes back toward Terry. He was frozen in disbelief, his mind scrambling to comprehend what he was seeing. After taking a final shot, the wolf casually trotted away, leaving behind only enormous, deep-set tracks in the mud that stretched for miles into the wilderness, where it disappeared without a trace. That night, the Shermans couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The ranch, which had felt like a safe haven, now seemed hostile. Gwen, especially, began noticing strange phenomena. It started with light, unexplained orbs hovering over the fields, silently gliding across the sky before disappearing into the night. At first they seemed like distant stars, but the way they moved erratically and intelligently made it clear they weren't natural. Soon after, the cattle began acting strangely. The usually calm animals were now jittery and restless, huddling together as if sensing danger. More terrifyingly, the Shermans began to notice their cattle going missing. One night, a prized cow vanished without a trace. There were no tracks, no signs of struggle, just the eerie silence that now blanketed the ranch. Days later, Terry found one of his cows dead in the field. Its body had been mutilated in a way that was both grotesque and unnatural. Deep, precise incisions had been made, and the cow was entirely drained of blood. There were no signs of scavengers, no footprints, and no blood in the surrounding area. It was as if something had performed a surgical procedure on the animal, and the land itself had absorbed all evidence of the slaughter. More bizarre occurrences followed. The ground near the house began to vibrate at odd intervals, sending waves of unease through the Shermans. Objects inside the home would disappear only to reappear in strange places days later. Once, Gwen's set of kitchen knives vanished, only to be found neatly stacked in the freezer. On another occasion, heavy machinery Terry had parked in the barn was found disassembled the next morning, with parts scattered across the yard. It was as if a force something unseen was playing with them, testing their resolve, pushing them closer to madness. The most terrifying night came when Terry decided to stake out the ranch with his dogs, determined to catch whatever was tormenting them. Armed with his rifle, he ventured into the fields, following the strange lights that had returned once again, hovering just beyond the tree line. His dogs growled low in their throats, pacing nervously. As Terry crept forward, the lights flickered and moved, taunting him. Suddenly the dogs bolted into the darkness, chasing something Terry couldn't see. He shouted after them, but their barking quickly turned to terrified yelps. Terry followed the sounds, his heart racing, until he found a clearing where the dogs had vanished. There, in the cold light of the moon, he found only large, circular patches of scorched earth. His dogs were gone completely, without a trace. The Shermans were at their breaking point. The ranch, once a symbol of their fresh start, had become a nightmare. No one believed their stories. People dismissed them as superstitions or hallucinations brought on by isolation. But the Shermans knew what they had seen, and more importantly, they knew something was out there, watching them, toying with them. As the months dragged on, Terry and Gwen began to suspect that they were not merely dealing with one strange phenomenon, but a series of interconnected events. Strange lights in the sky, mutilated cattle, the eerie wolf that wouldn't die, and the unnatural occurrences in their home. Local legends about Skinwalkers, a cursed, malevolent witch that could shape-shift into animals, began to surface in their conversations with nearby Navajo neighbors. The neighbors told them to leave, warning that Skinwalkers were powerful and dangerous entities that should not be trifled with. Some said the land was cursed, a battleground of ancient supernatural forces. Eventually the Shermans could take no more. They sold the ranch in 1996, desperate to escape the grip of whatever was tormenting them. Paranormal researchers later bought the property and began studying the area, recording strange phenomena, UFO sightings, cryptid-like creatures, and electromagnetic anomalies. Skinwalker Ranch, as it became known, remains one of the most infamous paranormal hotspots in the world, where the unexplained continues to unfold to this day. The Shermans never returned. Even years later, when asked about their time on the ranch, a shadow would cross their faces. They spoke little of the horrors they witnessed, but their silence spoke volumes. The land, once their dream, had become a nightmare, a place where the boundaries between reality and the supernatural blurred, and where something ancient and unspeakable still lingered in the darkness. It was a particularly quiet night in the late 1980s when Officer John Yazzie, a member of the Navajo tribal police, set out on his usual patrol across the vast, empty stretches of the Navajo Reservation. The air was cool, the desert illuminated by the pale glow of the moon. It was the kind of night that felt endless, with the desert silence pressing in on all sides, broken only by the distant howls of coyotes. John had been a police officer for nearly a decade, and he knew these roads and the people who lived out here like the back of his hand. He had heard the stories, the legends passed down through generations about the supernatural forces that lurked in the desert. Growing up Navajo, he had been raised on the stories of Skinwalkers, witches who could transform into animals and move with unnatural speed. But like many of his generation, John regarded these tales as just that, stories meant to scare children. That night, however, his skepticism would be shattered. It was just after midnight when John spotted movement along the side of the road. At first, he thought it might be a stray animal or a wandering coyote, common enough in the desert. But as his headlights swept over the figure, a chill ran down his spine. The shape was human, or at least it was trying to be. The figure was hunched over, its limbs impossibly long and thin, as if its bones were too large for its skin. It moved with an eerie grace, loping along the side of the road on all fours. John slowed his patrol car, squinting to get a better look. The thing was fast, too fast. His instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong. He reached for his radio, but before he could call it in, the creature darted off the road and into the scrub brush, vanishing into the darkness. His heart pounded as he pulled the car over. Against his better judgment, he got out, shining his flashlight into the surrounding desert. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but dry dirt and cacti. But then, just beyond the reach of the light, he saw them, footprints, human footprints. But something about them was off. They were too large, too deep, as if whoever or whatever had made them was unnaturally heavy. John's training kicked in. He followed the tracks cautiously, gripping his flashlight in one hand and his sidearm in the other. The prints led away from the road, twisting and turning through the desert, as if the creature had been toying with him, leading him further into the vast, silent night. The stillness of the desert was now oppressive, each sound amplified in the emptiness. Suddenly, there was a loud thud against his patrol car. He spun around, shining his flashlight in the direction of the noise, only to catch a glimpse of something darting across the roof. It was fast, too fast for him to fully comprehend. He could hear it, claws scraping against the metal roof, a low growl echoing in the silence. Heart racing, John aimed his light at the back of the car. His breath caught in his throat. Perched on the roof was the same hunched figure, its limbs bent at impossible angles. It crouched like an animal, but its face was what haunted him. It was almost human, but the eyes glowed with a faint, sickly yellow light, and the mouth stretched too wide, revealing sharp, jagged teeth. The skin was leathery, cracked and peeling in places, like it had been worn for too long. The creature stared at him for what felt like an eternity, its breath ragged and uneven. Then, with an unnatural shriek, it leapt from the roof and bolted into the desert, its limbs moving with the speed and grace of a predator. John stood frozen, unable to move or react as the thing disappeared into the darkness. When he finally regained control of his body, he rushed back to the car, jumping inside and locking the doors. His hands trembled as he gripped the steering wheel, his mind racing with what he had just seen. He radioed in the incident, but his voice was shaky, unsure. What could he say? He knew no one would believe him. For the next few nights, John couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every time he returned to his small home on the reservation, he would hear strange noises outside, soft scratching at his window, the low growl of something circling the house. His grandmother, a wise elder in the community, noticed his unease. When she asked him what was wrong, he hesitated but eventually told her about the encounter. Her face paled, her eyes growing wide with fear as he spoke. When he finished, she whispered, "You've encountered a skinwalker." She explained that skinwalkers were witches, people who had turned away from Navajo spiritual teachings, forsaking their humanity to become something dark, something evil. They could transform into animals, control minds, and bring sickness and death to their enemies. To become one, a person had to commit the most unforgivable act, murdering a close family member. "Do not speak of it again," she warned him. "You've angered it. Now, it knows you." Her words chilled him to the bone. That night, John barely slept. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind, felt like the skinwalker's presence looming closer. He could feel its malevolent gaze, always just beyond the darkness, waiting, watching. The strange occurrences continued over the following weeks. John would come home to find strange markings in the dirt outside his house, circles, lines, and symbols that made no sense to him but filled him with dread. At night, he would hear faint whispers in an unfamiliar language, almost like chanting, echoing in the wind. His dog, usually calm and protective, began to act erratically, barking at nothing and refusing to go outside after dark. One evening, as John sat in his living room, the soft tapping on the window returned. But this time, it was deliberate, insistent. He stood frozen in the middle of the room, his heart pounding as he realized it was coming from the front window, the one facing the porch. Slowly he turned and looked. There, standing just outside the glass, was the figure again, this time in human form. It wore the tattered remains of clothes, its face blank and expressionless, but the eyes, the glowing, sickly yellow eyes, were unmistakable. The skinwalker raised a hand, slowly dragging its sharp claws across the glass, producing a high-pitched screech that sent shivers down John's spine. With a final, lingering stare, the creature turned and melted into the night. John knew then that he couldn't stay. The skinwalker had marked him. He left his post soon after, leaving the reservation and moving far away, but the memories never left him. Every so often, when he found himself alone in the dead of night, he would hear the scratching sound again, faint but unmistakable, and feel those glowing yellow eyes watching him from the shadows. He could never shake the fear that the skinwalker was still out there, waiting, following, and that one day it would come for him again. It was the summer of 2005, and a group of college friends decided to embark on a camping trip to reconnect after a hectic semester. The destination, a remote section of the New Mexico wilderness, miles from the nearest town. It was perfect for a weekend getaway. No cell service, no distractions, just the vast expanse of the wilderness, tall trees, and the promise of starlit nights. The group consisted of 6. Mike, the easygoing leader of the group. Jess, his girlfriend, and an avid nature enthusiast. Eli, the prankster who never took anything seriously. Nina, the quiet artist with a love for photography. Alex, the skeptic who had no belief in anything supernatural. And Casey, the storyteller, who often entertained the group with tales of urban legends and folklore. As they drove deep into the forest, the excitement was palpable, but none of them knew the nightmare that awaited them. By the time they reached the campsite, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows through the dense trees. The air was crisp and filled with the earthy scent of pine and moss. They set up their tents, laughing and teasing one another about the rough weekend ahead, especially Eli, who joked about the so-called forest monsters that people claimed roamed these parts. "Maybe we'll see Bigfoot," Eli laughed as they built a campfire. Casey, however, had another idea. "You ever heard of the Skinwalker?" she asked, her voice dropping into a low, eerie tone that instantly caught everyone's attention. Eli, of course, rolled his eyes, but the others leaned in closer. Casey went on to tell them the Navajo legend, how skinwalkers were witches who could transform into animals, mimic voices, and stalk their prey. They look human at first, but something's always off. They wear animal skins and can shift into anything, a coyote, a deer, or even a person. And once they've seen you, they can follow you anywhere. Nina shuddered. glancing uneasily into the surrounding trees. "Cut it out, Case, you're just trying to freak us out." But Casey smiled darkly. "I'm not making it up. People disappear out here all the time. Some say it's a skinwalker that takes them, turns into someone they know, lures them away and, well, you can guess the rest." The group was silent for a moment, the only sound being the crackling of the fire. Then Eli broke the tension, laughing loudly. All right, enough of that spooky stuff. Let's focus on not burning our dinner." The night passed uneventfully, though the tale of the Skinwalker lingered in the back of their minds. By morning, the fear seemed silly, replaced by the excitement of hiking and exploring the forest. They spent the day wandering through the woods, snapping photos and climbing small hills. Everything felt normal, peaceful even, until dusk began to settle in. As the group made their way back toward the campsite, they noticed something strange. Jess, who had been leading the way, stopped suddenly. "Do you guys hear that?" she asked, her voice low and tense. The others quieted, straining their ears. It was faint at first, like a whisper carried on the wind. Then it grew louder, a voice soft and familiar. "Help me, please, help me." Nina froze. That's my voice." The others stared at her, confused. "What do you mean? You're right here," Alex said. But Nina's face had gone pale. "It's me," Nina repeated, pointing into the forest. "It sounds like me." The voice came again, clearer this time and unmistakable. It was Nina's voice, calling from deeper within the woods. "Help! I'm lost. Please, someone help." Panic set in. "This isn't funny," Mike said, his voice shaking. "Who's doing this?" Eli, trying to keep the mood light, chuckled nervously. "Good one, Nina. Nice prank. You got us." But Nina shook her head furiously. "It's not me, I swear!" Suddenly the voice stopped. An oppressive silence filled the air, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Then, from the shadows between the trees, something moved. At first it looked like a person, someone standing just beyond the firelight. But as the figure stepped forward, the group realized something was terribly wrong. The figure had Nina's face, but the body was wrong, twisted and unnatural. Its limbs were too long, and its joints bent the wrong way. The skin, pale and leathery, stretched taut over the skeletal frame. It was a mockery of Nina, a grotesque imitation. Nina backed away, her breath quickening. "What the hell is that?" The creature, still wearing Nina's face, tilted its head, its mouth opening in a wide, unnatural grin. "Help me!" It rasped in Nina's voice, but now the words were distorted, broken, like a scratched record. In a sudden blur of motion, the creature dropped to all fours and began to sprint toward them, its elongated limbs moving in jerky, unnatural movements. The group scattered in terror, running in different directions as the creature chased them through the darkening woods. Mike grabbed Jess's hand, pulling her with him as they bolted through the trees. Behind them, they could hear the creature's distorted voice mimicking their cries for help, its voice shifting from Nina's to Jess's, then to Mike's. "Please, don't leave me. I'm hurt." It was playing with them, stalking them, and enjoying their fear. Alex and Eli sprinted in the opposite direction, with Eli trying to keep up the pretense that it was some elaborate prank, but his voice wavered. "It's just someone messing with us, right? Right?" Alex didn't answer. His face was grim, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. They ran until they couldn't hear the others, until the only sound was their own footsteps pounding against the earth. But then from behind them, they heard it again. Eli's voice, calling out for help. "Alex, Eli, where are you?" Alex stopped, spinning around. Eli stood behind him, but his face was blank, emotionless. "Eli," Alex asked, backing away. "What's wrong with you?" Before Eli could respond, another voice echoed through the trees, closer this time. "Alex!" It was Eli's voice, but Eli was right next to him. "Run!" Alex shouted, grabbing Eli's arm, pulling him forward. They had to get back to the others. Meanwhile, Nina, separated from the group, was alone in the woods. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stumbled through the brush, her flashlight flickering. She could hear the creature, her own voice now, mimicking her cries. "Help me. I'm lost." She ran faster, tears streaming down her face. She didn't know where the others were. The forest seemed to be closing in on her, the trees twisting and looming, their branches like clawed hands reaching for her. And then, in the distance, she saw it, her own face, grinning at her from the shadows. It was close now, too close. She turned and bolted, but her foot caught on a root, and she fell hard to the ground. The thing was almost on her, its twisted limbs scuttling across the forest floor, its grin widening. Just as it reached for her, a sharp noise pierced the air, a gunshot. The creature let out a shriek, jerking back into the shadows as Mike and Jess burst through the trees. Mike held a rifle, his hands shaking as he aimed it toward where the creature had disappeared. The group eventually regrouped, exhausted and terrified. They stumbled back to the campsite, packed up their gear in record time, and left that very night, vowing never to return to those cursed woods. No one spoke of what they had seen, but as they drove away, they could still hear the faint echo of voices behind them, mimicking their cries, calling out for help. And in the rearview mirror, they saw something standing at the edge of the trees, watching them. It wore one of their faces, grinning as they disappeared into the night. They never went back, but the memories and the haunting feeling that something was still following them never left. Even years later, on quiet, dark nights, they could still hear it. That terrible voice, the one that sounded just like them.